Hello guys, today I have a gift for you. I decided to release my newest premium course from Laravel Daily about AI coding for free on YouTube. Entirely full course. So what you will see now will be 1 hour course, 5 lessons combined into one YouTube video, basically going through current trends of most popular AI coding agents currently on the market, which I consider Cursor, Claude Code, and then Codex CLI with GPT model. So I will show you how I use them personally for Laravel. Also, I will mention Laravel Boost and how I use it and why you should definitely use it for AI agentic coding. And in the final 2 lessons, I will mention other IDEs like VS Code and PhpStorm and will give more tips on how to get better results from your AI agent. I consider this course kind of a recap overview of the current market state as of November 2025. And this is one of those courses that I will need probably to reshoot every 6 months or even more often. It's changing very rapidly. And if you like this course, you may watch more courses on Laravel Daily for premium members. Some of them are here below. And also a reminder, currently there's Black Friday promotion, which gives 40% off yearly or lifetime membership on Laravel Daily. So you can watch all courses, currently 80 courses and a lot more premium tutorials. And also a new thing, personal roadmap in your account. You can fill in the form to get my personal mentorship, limited to first 100 people, 58 spots currently still available. So now let's get to the course about AI coding as of November 2025 with Laravel examples. Welcome to this course about Laravel and AI as of November 2025. And let's start this course not from discussing Cursor or Claude or models, but with general problem you would face with any AI LLM, with actually any framework, not only Laravel. And this is outdated trained models and context. So imagine you put that into your AI agent to generate some code. It doesn't matter, in this case it's Cursor, it may be Claude Code, it may be Codex, we will talk about them a bit later. But the main problem is that the model can be trained on earlier version of Laravel, like Laravel 11, or it may happen with any framework. So the usual typical solution for that is to add to a prompt, use Laravel 12 syntax or something like that, or provide that in the guidelines as context. But for Laravel framework, there's a universal solution called Laravel Boost package. So let me show you why you need it in any Laravel project where you would use AI agents, and let me show you what it does and how it works. So this is the GitHub page of Laravel Boost. You can read that in full, but we will just install it and I'll show you that in action. So we do compose or require Laravel Boost. At the time of shooting this video, it's version 1.8, and then we run boost install. And this is actually, I will clear. So, and this is interesting. In this case, we will not use herd MCP. This is additional. Then it will choose AI guidelines. In this case, Fortify comes with Livewire Starter Kit for 2-factor authentication. I will not choose it. And this is the main thing. In the next 2 prompts, Boost will ask you which IDEs you want guidelines generated for. In my case, I use all 5 of them. Recently, they started supported open code as well. So they started with 4 other editors, but you can choose either of them or all of them. And let's stick with all of them. And then this is probably the main question, which agents need guidelines. So each agent, each IDE has its own rules, its own file names, its own structure where to put the guidelines for AI. And Laravel Boost will generate all of them. So let's also tick GitHub Copilot as well. So there are 6 at the moment. And you can also add your custom IDE. You can read Laravel Boost docs for that. This is kind of extra thing. And let's do exactly that and see what happens. In this case, I've installed Livewire Starter Kit in Laravel 12. And then Boost detects which Laravel ecosystem packages you have in your project. So Laravel version 12, then Livewire version 3, Pest, Tailwind 4, Pint, and also PHP general. And it generates the guidelines for best practices for latest versions or specific versions if it's detected for those packages. So if we now open the file tree, you can see .cursor rules Laravel Boost MDC. And This is what Boost has generated: foundation rules about Laravel, then it lists for the AI which are the versions, then some general conventions, and then it lists the rules by each tool. So Laravel Boost rules, then you have the section of PHP rules, the section about probably Laravel core, and so on. So in total it's like a few hundred lines of markdown, which is then passed to the AI as context, and then AI knows which versions, which are best practices, and so on. And this is an example for Cursor, but the same was for other IDEs. So for example, we have Claude MD with probably identical text, but for Claude Code you don't have to pass Claude MD automatically. For Cursor you may choose whether you want to do that always apply or apply with some other rules. We'll get to that when we talk more about Cursor. But yeah, Laravel Boost helps a lot with guidelines for specific and newest versions of Laravel ecosystem packages. And Boost is not only about guidelines. Inside it has also 16 MCP tools, like get configuration for Laravel, get routes, for example, if AI needs that, and the most probably important part, search docs. So if AI agent detects that something needs to be searched in the docs, then it calls search docs by Laravel Boost and takes the latest version of Laravel or whatever is the framework, and then gets the latest information. Also in the docs you may find that you can add custom guidelines on top of the default framework guidelines for your personal preference, for your team, how to generate stuff. You just put Markdown or Blade files in this folder, and then when you run Boost install, they will be glued together into the same guidelines file. So I do recommend to install Laravel Boost in any project where you would use AI agents. And the final note about that, you should run Boost install only after you run Composer require for all the core features. Because when you choose Laravel framework with starter kit, you may choose Livewire under the hood, like Flux or Vault, and those have documentations in Laravel Boost. So when you choose to use Inertia, for example, or when you choose any packages from these available AI guidelines, you should do that before installing Boost, so Boost would detect those packages and add to the guidelines. So Laravel Boost is a great helper to choose no matter which, again, prompt, LLM, or IDE you use. Now let's get more practical in the next lessons about those IDEs and LLM models and agents. In this video, let's talk about Cursor editor and how to use that with Laravel. And recently Cursor 2.0 was released, the new version, which changed a lot in terms of UI and UX and general how to use Cursor. And also they released their in-house model called Composer 1, and we'll talk about models in a minute. So if you see any tutorial about Cursor earlier than 2.0, you may see different view on the screen, but the fundamentals are roughly the same. You can either prompt the agent to generate or fix the code, or use it as a typical IDE, going through files and typing the code manually. Cursor is a fork of VS Code, so a lot of things from Visual Studio Code will work automatically in Cursor, so you can install extensions like VS Code extension for Laravel, this one, the official from the marketplace from the core team, that would also work in Cursor. Next, let's talk about actually code writing. And this remains the primary use case, at least in my opinion, for developers to use AI. The agent can generate anything for you, but you should be careful going to so-called vibe coding and just asking agent to generate full projects. I personally like to be in control of the code and type the code, at least start the idea, and then Cursor may help with finish the idea, polish the idea, and autocomplete a lot of things. And this is actually the biggest strength of Cursor versus other IDEs. For example, if you type in the terminal to generate post with migration and model, then you open, for example, post migration, and autocompletes with tab will be very useful. So you go here, when you hit enter, something will appear. So for example, you may hit tab for user ID, you may hit another tab for more fields, and probably delete some of them, for example. And then one of the greatest parts of Cursor is if you go to post model now, for example, it will remember what you did just now. And see, I didn't even type, I just put the cursor here. And I can hit tab and get those fillables and relationship, and also it suggests to jump here to add the user model, but I'm not sure actually if it's needed because it's in the same namespace. I think that is fine. And also some manual changes, and we need only those fields, or in fact it is suggesting user ID as well. So let's hit tab. And this is our model. So while working with Cursor, it's kind of a mix of typing code, hitting tab for autocomplete, and then editing if something is not exactly how you want it. In fact, I want to show you a Reddit meme. I recently saw this on Cursor Reddit, which describes perfectly the tab, tab, tab workflow. Because a lot of people are trying to use AI IDEs in agentic mode, just prompting that you are senior developer something something mega prompt, and then AI does something which then requires a lot of time for review, fix, and double triple check. Instead, again, I'm kind of repeating myself, a better way is to use tab, tab, tab and offload small tasks to agents when it's pretty clear what to do, but AI can help you to avoid typing the code. And this is where we get to the agent mode. For that, in Cursor, you open that with Command I, and here I have older prompt, which I will delete, and let's prompt for something like generate CRUD API for post model. And this is one of the most important things while working with agents. The context is everything. So if you specify specific files, folders, or other references, if you hit add, then Cursor suggests you the files, then the docs, branches with Git and others. And then also the more context you give in your own words, for example, CRUD API should be done with or without API resources. Generate API resources. By default, probably Cursor wouldn't do that. But before I hit send, another kind of tip, terminal versus AI. So if you can do something in terminal faster and more reliably, for example, in Laravel you need to install API, it's much better to do that in terminal because the result is deterministic and it's faster, and you don't need to rely on some other model to do that. So I've installed API, and now I can tell AI agent API in Laravel 12 is installed already, for example. And also you may provide more details. Validation, for example, should be in form requests. Classes. So this is how you basically prompt agent. The more context, the more details, the better the result. And this is why sometimes it makes more sense to start typing or generating code manually with artisan commands and then offload only some parts to the agent. Because if you need to spend a lot of time describing that, then the time benefit is questionable. And also it would make sense maybe to have smaller tasks generated, like for example, generate controller, generate API resources and stuff like that. But let's try to run this prompt as it is, and for that you need to choose the model. You saw that already. So Composer 1 is currently new in-house model by Cursor, which is really fast, and at the time of shooting this video it is free. It will not be free probably quite soon, so I'm not sure about the price, but in general the price is calculated almost with API pricing of those models. Whether you use Sonnet 4.5 or GPT-5 or others, you will have Cursor dashboard, which I will show you in a minute, with the price of specific prompt deducted from your $20 per month subscription on Cursor, for example, if you choose $20 plan. But basically, if we discuss the question of which model to choose, the best ones currently on the market for coding are Sonnet 4.5 and GPT-5 Codex. So either of those would probably give you good enough result. For smaller tasks, and this is considered, I would say, smaller task, you can choose faster models which are cheaper but not that reliable sometimes. These are Composer 1, Haiku 4.5 from Claude, Anthropic, or Grok Code from Grok from Elon Musk. But let's try Composer 1 and see what happens, what files it would generate. As you will see, it will be pretty fast browsing through the files. And also inside Cursor, currently I allowed it to basically run commands, but basically it's running PHP Artisan something something, make this, make resource, make make resource indeed, and completed 6 out of 6. And yeah, it is done already in like seconds. It's, as I said, blazingly fast. And let's see what files are generated. And we can review. For example, you can click review, and then on the left you will see the files changed. So here we have form request, which seems okay. Also messages, specifically separate form request, okay. Post resource for API, then post controller, also with API namespace, using that post resource, great, all seems fine to me. And finally the routes for that controller. So it was pretty fast and pretty accurate. Maybe I would change small details here and there, but all in all, I'm pretty satisfied with the result. And if you are satisfied with the result of the agent, you can click Keep All. But even if you don't hit Keep All, those files are already saved in your project. So this is the structure, and you can already see controllers API here, and also in Git you would see the changes, but in this case I didn't initialize the repository. So you can choose either to keep all, or you can do undo all, for example, and it would revert the changes. So let's hit undo all in this case. And interesting thing with undo cursor, this is another important thing you need to understand. Undo is just undoing the latest action by cursor, which may be not all undo. So post controller was generated and this was not undone, so the file remained. So a better way to undo is to still use git and then discard the changes or roll back the changes with git instead of using cursor. So in this case, what undo all did is switching the files to their initial state after they were generated. So this is the default form request, the default, what was that, routes API, and others. And as one more experiment, I will show you how in Cursor you can use multiple agents at the same time, multiple models. So you can prompt the same thing to multiple models and then choose which one you want to proceed with. For that, you do need to have Git repository. So let's initialize repository here. I will do it just inside of Cursor, or it would be the same as VS Code, initial commit, for example. And commit, I will not push to any repo remotely. But now what we can do is open the agent and then, for example, plus start new session, which is important. If you do that in the same window, prompting more and more, it would pollute the so-called context of AI, and the result would be worse and the cost would be bigger. So whenever you prompt something new, just open new chat window. And now when you do have that GitHub repository, you may choose multiple models here. And for better experience, I will show you the new feature of Cursor 2.0, which is agents mode. On top, it's not really visible actually. I can probably put it down. So yeah, agents or editor, you can switch between them. And if you switch to agents, this is kind of the workflow of Cursor, more familiar to Claude Code or Codex users, for example, for CLI agents users, and we'll talk about those in the next lessons. But basically, the idea here is that you don't see the code right away, you work just with agents, prompting and reviewing. So for example, let's run the same prompt, a bit modified because the file is already existing. And here, let's choose multiple models, and let's choose not Composer 1 because we saw that already in action. Let's choose Sonnet 4.5 and Grok Code, for example. So 3 models, and then let's run and see what happens. Let's close that, and then we have 3 agents performing the same task simultaneously with work trees, but you don't need to care that much about that, how it's done under the hood. So you can follow all 3 with their progress, and then whenever you're ready, each model has different like to-do, task list, logic, and Sonnet is actually only planning. Codex is already running. Sometimes, by the way, it doesn't work. So this is what happens with Cursor or with LLM. I'm not sure which is the failure point. Sometimes it doesn't work. It's stuck on planning next moves. It happened to me a few times during shooting the videos on YouTube for AI-related videos, but basically you can follow what is done in the meantime, and I think Grok Code would be the fastest. Deliver, yep, completed. It's running the summary now, and yeah, the summary is ready. Meanwhile, Sonnet 4.5 hasn't started and Codex is running. And we can review the code like this. So there are 5 files here, and then you open here and see the results. Auth check, rules, okay. It suggests to have user in the post resource, which is different from what we saw in Composer 1. Also authorize is more complex. Instead of just returning true, the controller is returning the types like this with full path. I'm not a big fan of that, but basically you can just apply all and then make the changes manually, or reprompt the agent to make some changes. But in this case, you need to actively choose which model do you choose by using apply all. So for example, for Sonnet, I will just stop it because it didn't do anything, it didn't even start, so task cancelled. For Codex, how much is left? I'm not even sure whether I should wait for that. For some reason, it's slower than usual. Usually it's not that slow, but I will stop it here. And for Grok Code, I will hit apply all, and then those changes are applied. And then if we switch to editor mode, for example, we close the sidebar agent and we open the sidebar with Git. Here you see the actual changes and commit them to repository. And as I said, I advise to use Git for the history, for rolling back, for example, discarding changes and stuff like that. So basically this is how you work with Cursor. The final thing I want to show you is price. If we take a look at the official pricing of Cursor, it's probably the most controversial pricing because it was changed so many times over the month. But now it's stable, but stable not in terms of the cheapest one. So all of those IDEs, actually most of them have subscriptions, but the way how subscription works is different. With Cursor, you have, for example, $20 per month, which is exactly the plan that I have. And for that, what you get is unlimited tab completions, which is, as I said, the most useful thing in Cursor, in my experience. But then when prompting the agent, here's how much you pay. This is my Cursor dashboard, and these are the logs for what we paid for our prompts. So for Sonnet 4.5, it didn't even run, but for Codex, I paid 10 cents, and for Grok Code, I paid 4 cents, which is pretty low actually. And generally for bigger prompts, you can get bigger prices. You can see the history of my dashboard. I will zoom it in a bit. Some prompts go to 66 cents. Maybe there was up to $1 sometimes. So yeah, this one, Sonnet Thinking, was 64 cents. And I'm not a vibe coder, so I don't do too long prompts. So usually my prompts are within 10 or 20 cents. But still, it is calculated within your $20 plans, which means that 20 cents times 100 prompts and you're already out of your subscription plan, which means 100 prompts per month, which means 5 prompts per day or so, which is really low. In reality, their pricing plan is not actually $20, so they kind of negotiated, as they say, Cursor creators, with the models to get better pricing. So usually the plan runs out not at 20, it's at some random number which is calculated behind the scenes, and there is no specific number, but in my experience it's usually around $40 realistically. So you get like 10 prompts per day, but it depends on what is the prompt, what is the context, how many tokens, what model do you use. That's why it's beneficial to use something like Grok Code, which is cheaper, or their own internal composer, or Haiku, which is cheaper, but it wouldn't work well for bigger prompts or bigger context with a lot of files. You need to experiment. But what I want to emphasize here is that you do need to monitor the pricing of Cursor, because in some cases I've seen people reporting running out of their credits really fast. Even on my channel AI Coding Daily, I had a video about cursor pricing horror because they changed some pricing at that time. And if you search on Reddit, there are a lot of stories of people running out of credits. What can help here is you can enable a thing down below. You've used 3% of your usage limit, so it will monitor the percentage. This is one of the settings in Cursor. But yeah, generally Cursor is more expensive if you use AI agents a lot. Other alternatives like Claude, Code, and Codex are kind of included within your Claude or OpenAI ChatGPT subscriptions, and we'll talk about that right now in the next lessons. And they have so-called hourly limits or weekly limits, and again, I will show that in action, but it's much less brutal than Cursor. But on the other hand, Cursor is much better at auto-completing, as I showed you a few minutes ago. So how I personally use Cursor is when I'm in the mood or in the mode of typing the code, of being in control without agents, I do use Cursor to actually write code. And it helps a lot with me being much faster at doing that. But if I'm in the mode of agentic coding, which means offloading more tasks to AI to agents, then I run Claude Code or Codex. And let's move, and I will show you that in the next videos. In this video, I want to talk about two other competitors' solution and alternatives to Cursor, which is Claude Code and Codex CLI from OpenAI. And I decided to merge them together into one video because it's very similar in terms of practice, how it works, the workflow, the pricing, and in general, both are pretty popular, and developers that I see use them almost interchangeably, myself included. So let me show you both in action and what are the differences, what are the models, and stuff like that. So both are terminal CLI agents. And this is the main thing. So in Cursor, when you go to Agents tab that I show you, you just prompt the agent for something and then you see the result, and you don't really see the code until you need to review it. So this is new in Cursor in 2.0, but before Cursor, Claude Code was the first, or almost the first, to kind of introduce this workflow in the terminal, which felt weird for a lot of developers at the time, and especially for non-developers. So you just go to terminal and type something that you want from your AI agent to generate or to fix the code by just typing your prompt, and you don't see any files or editor. That was weird. But thinking about it, the more I worked with that, the more agentic coding you want to get into. For example, offload some task to an agent, then you can basically go away from your computer for a few minutes and then come back for the result. Or you may, of course, participate in that process, but it seems like almost like ChatGPT, but in terminal, conversation with the agent to get the actual result without looking at the full code. So in that mode, if you are in that mode of kind of ChatGPT, but just agent who would know your code, then you may like that workflow. So you can run Claude in terminal after I installed it on my machine with npm. So you run Claude, and then, whoa, those bright colors. There will be some questions in the beginning, so to use MCP or not, to use something. And then we have Claude Code with just one line greeting you to prompt for something. So let's try that in action. For example, I know that in that code base there's post resource, and I don't want to show timestamps in that API. Let's prompt for exactly that in post resource, and you can reference files with @ and then choose with arrows which file you actually mean, like this. And this is important. Same with Cursor, context is everything. You can reference files or full folders. I don't want timestamps to be shown, like this. And then it starts thinking. Again, you don't look at the code, you don't have code. In this case, I do have Cursor opened, and then you see the changes like this, update, and then it asks you, do you want to make this edit? And then you can confirm for that specific change or allow all edits during this session, and then it makes the changes. Done. I've removed, and then you go out of that terminal mode, and to properly review all the changes if you haven't followed them, then you go into your IDE, whether it's Cursor, VS Code, PhpStorm, or whatever. Then you may see changes in Git history. So in post resource, we don't see timestamps here anymore, so it was successful. And see, I'm switching between Claude Code and Cursor. The thing is that Claude Code and Codex as well may work inside of Cursor, inside of your IDE. And this is exactly how I use that, and a lot of developers use that as well. So let's exit here. So you prompt basically with a lot of so-called slash commands. There's, for example, you can check for usage, how much left in your current session or current week. There are limits for pricing. We'll talk about that a bit later. But basically, it's all about terminal command slash something, and you prompt additional to your text prompts. So we exit for exiting Claude Code. And if we switch to Cursor, for example, let's commit work in progress for now, so we would see the actual change later more clearly. And now in the terminal of Cursor, let's clear it up, you just launch Claude here. So it works within the terminal, but then also what it can do for you, for example, in post resource, you open that file as well on top, and you highlight what changes you want to make. For example, this user, you highlight and then see 5 lines selected, and then you prompt based on those highlighted lines. For example, remove this user from resource, like this. And then the same thing happens in the terminal, and you can simultaneously see the changes here and also see the changes in Cursor or in your IDE, like the C above. You can already see it right away. And then again, it asks for permission to make this change, and I allow to do that. So it actually comes from both worlds, the best from both worlds. So you're still in the terminal prompting the agent, but at the same time, depending on what else you open on the screen, you see the actual changes, you see Git history and stuff like that. Now again, let's exit the Claude Code, and sometimes it jumps in terminal if I resize the window. I'm not sure if it's my fault, if I'm doing something wrong, but for the purpose of shooting videos, I do need to resize those tabs and terminals a lot. Probably you will not need to do that. And then if we clear, and we can launch another terminal IDE, which is Codex CLI from OpenAI. And by the way, with models, for example, let's launch Claude again, and we can type /model, and it will allow you to choose between Sonnet and Haiku 4.5 at the moment, at the time of shooting this video. And if you want Opus, which is kind of phasing out, so I don't recommend Opus, but you would need to upgrade for higher plan. I'm currently on $20 plan from Anthropic, and we'll get to pricing in a minute. But basically, for most cases in Claude Code, you use Sonnet. Exit again and launch, clear the terminal, launch Codex. How does that work? Again, a few questions. Allow Codex to work without asking. Okay, let's allow it to work. And if we make it a bit bigger so you can see OpenAI Codex, the version, and again, it's all about slash commands if you want to use them, or you can just start typing. For example, in the post resource, again, at, then arrow down, enter, and it would reference the file, return only 50 symbols from content, for example, like this. And let's see that in action. It's also working. In this case, it's using GPT-5 model. It's calling Laravel Boost, by the way. So Codex is a bit slower in general, but more accurate. So it depends on what tasks you are working on. That's why I use sometimes Claude Code, sometimes Codex, sometimes even Cursor. And in this case, it's asking Laravel Boost. So this is the advantage of Laravel Boost. It's asking for docs, for eloquent resources, and then decides what to do. Also, it's automatically running test or creating the test in this case. So it will not just make the change, but it will also generate the post tests. And this test actually is with PEST because it's in guidelines of Laravel Boost. So Codex knows that it's supposed to generate tests and run them. So it runs bind, it runs git diff. Did it run tests? Yep, it ran test. I think it was successful. So as you can see, it's slower. It's 1.5 minutes, but in addition, you have tests. And this is a pretty important thing. So it's changing something, editing. So the tests wasn't successful. There's a fail here. So sometimes those models, this is what happens. This is actually a great example. Sometimes the models go in circles trying to find something and fix something and find something again. And now the tests pass. I'm not sure what it changed. Actually, we will see in the Git in a minute. but sometimes it takes longer just because the model finds something that is incorrect or tests fail, and then it tries to be helpful and fix the errors. So in this case, in 2 minutes, we have the change. Let's take a look at changes. So I will close the terminal for now. So the change here is str limit. I'm not sure if I would put string here, and I'm not sure if I would use str as class. I would prefer str as helper, but I can reprompt for that. And there's a test automatically checking that return. So this is another addition. So actually, whenever you use AI agents, the models, automated tests is actually one of the best ways to, well, test if the results is good. And now let's open the terminal back, and I will reprompt. I would prefer str helper instead of str class. And then in this case, it found the thing pretty easily without asking Boost, but now the tests fail. Oh, this is interesting. It tries to go type safety with string and then string on top. Wow, I probably would not use that code specifically. But yeah, again, same with cursor. After those changes, you can go and close the terminal and go and type whatever you want manually. I personally often use AI agents for like first draft of something, then sometimes that draft gives me some ideas for how it is possible to implement the stuff, and then I go and fix the code manually. So often, even in my mind, I'm not expecting a one-shot correct result from the beginning. I just use AI as assistant, but then on top, I'm in control of whatever changes I want to make. And now let's talk about pricing. What is better with Claude Code or Codex versus Cursor? So in Cursor, as you saw in previous video, there's $20, and then you pay basically for every prompt until you run out of those $20 or $40 or something like that. In this case, it's different. You choose the subscription for Claude, for Anthropic in general, which includes Claude on the web. So you get to use the premium version of Claude.ai and also Claude Code. And then the Pro plan allows you to have Claude Code. In this case, it's $17 or $20 if billed monthly. And then it has limitations for 5-hour window, so-called, or weekly limitations. So the thing that you saw earlier, /command usage, will show you how much you have used from current 5-hour session. If you run out of that 100%, then it will stop you and ask you for upgrading the plan. Also in current week, how many tokens you have used again, and also Opus, but I don't use that, so I don't look at that third line. And in my experience, in those 5-hour windows, depending on what you prompt, in this case for demo, the prompts are really simple. But for something more complex, in 5 hours, you get something like 10 to 50 prompts, which is, in my experience, for default developer usage, not a vibe coder, is enough. If I wanted to create the full project like a vibe coder with one prompt, of course, it would eat the session in probably a few prompts or even one prompt. But generally, I'm on $20 plan, and I rarely go over like 50% over week or current session. That said, of course, I have 3 subscriptions, so I can jump between Claude Code and Codex and Cursor. So in total, it costs me like $60. And also, I'm not doing coding all day. I do shooting videos and courses, so that's that. Another reason why I may not run out of credits, but I hear a lot of developers who use AI casually as assistant kind of reporting the same thing for pricing. $20 per month plan on any of those 3 leaders, Cursor, Claude Code, or Codex, will give you pretty good result. And in terms of Codex pricing, I'm currently on Plus plan, which is the plan of ChatGPT, which is again giving you the ChatGPT Pro or Plus subscription, it's called. So you can use the AI agent outside of development for your personal needs and Codex CLI inside of that. With that, there are similar limits for 5-hour windows and weekly limits. And if you really need more usage, you may upgrade to Pro plan on ChatGPT or similar. In Claude, they have max 5 and max 20 plans. Another important thing is choosing the models. So as you saw, Claude Code has Sonnet, Haiku, or Opus, basically Anthropic Claude models. Same with OpenAI Codex. If you launch Codex and if you type in model, what are the choices? GPT-5, just what you want, Mini or Codex or Broad, but it's all within the OpenAI ecosystem. So this is probably the biggest downside of using Claude Code or Codex. First, if the model doesn't perform well, if it doesn't give result, then you cannot choose other models. And also, if that model is having issues at the moment, which happens, they have downtimes, they have hallucination spikes or something, they have slower behavior for no reason, they have times of the day which are overloaded and stuff like that. And then you're kind of waiting for better times, so to speak, or start coding manually. With Cursor, if you open Cursor agent, you can switch between GPT, Sonnet, or others at any time and continue the work. So basically the question is, which ecosystem do you want to invest in? Claude Anthropic, ChatGPT, OpenAI, Codex, or generally Cursor as IDE solution? As I mentioned multiple times in this video, they're all good enough. In fact, here I will quote a famous YouTuber, Theo, who tweeted that all of them are good, and the result mostly depend on how you prompt, how much context you give, and how you review the code generated. But also there are a few things how you can improve the result, and we'll talk about those in the next few videos. Before I move on to tips how to optimize the results by AI agents, let me also mention kind of honorable mentions of other IDEs to work with AI. So for example, if we go back to this tweet by Theo, this is the list of probably most popular editors in AI circles. So those three are on top, the ones that I go deep in this course, but also these are alternatives, and also two important editors are not mentioned in this list. These are VS Code and PhpStorm. So this is another tweet by Caleb Porzio, creator of Livewire, and when counting VS Code forks, including Cursor, now currently it's 50-50. So I guess it's good news for PhpStorm, so they're still holding strong no matter the competition with AI. And probably if you are a developer with a lot of experience, it's hard to change IDE without particular reason or much benefit because you have your shortcuts, your workflow, and stuff like that. So how are those two holding up when working with AI? Let's start with VS Code. So VS Code is a free editor, so you don't need to pay anything to anyone, but you may use GitHub Copilot Pro to ask agent to do things. It's similar to Cursor in a way. And in fact, it is cheaper to start, so GitHub Copilot Pro starts with $10 per month compared to other $20 per month subscription like Cursor or Claude Code or others. And here it's similar. You just type whatever you want and you choose the model, and the list of models is pretty significantly updated with variations of GPT-5, 4, and others, and Codex as well. So let's try to ask agent for something. Let's, for example, type in post resource, but in this case it's not add to tag a specific file, it's hash post resource. And this is first inconvenience. I had to type quite a lot until I get this result. And let's try to prompt this. I don't want ID to be returned. Simple. We will use GPT-5 Codex. And let's see how VS Code handles the thing. Because the thing is, when working with LLM, there are two kind of parameters to the result. LLM itself, and then the IDE, how it calls the LLM, and how it parses the result, and what is the workflow from IDE point of view. Okay, and now VS Code is trying to fetch example.com. I'm not sure why. Let's skip that for now. And now it's working, and it seems to be doing the job well, working. So basically, VS Code with GitHub Copilot is usable and actually got better over like a year or so. At first, GitHub was really behind with Copilot quality, but slowly they got back into the race. So now you can, for example, allow it to do something. So enable auto approve, for example. Of course, it will warn you, but for this specific example, I will allow, and it will make test. Test already exists. It didn't even check that the test exists. It reads, updates the test for missing field. So yeah, in my experience, actually, VS Code is a little worse than Cursor in various small details. So it doesn't detect something. it is a bit slower at times, always allow for example, and it opens the terminal here. So even the UI, UX, for example, I need to look here what is done, and then I also need to look here at the terminal. So personally, it's not convenient to me. It's either Claude Code doing that in the same terminal, or Cursor is doing that in the same agent window. But yeah, the result is done, and as I said, VS Code is usable and a bit cheaper, but currently, as much as I tried it, I don't prefer VS Code for working with AI. On top of that, the auto-completion by Cursor is much better. So for example, if I open Post here and I want to add something, it will try to suggest something, maybe. So I was expecting it to suggest, for example, use has factory or something. And for example, if I put the cursor here, nothing is suggested, but cursor ID would suggest some kind of attribute, some kind of method on top. So quite often VS Code doesn't suggest much, but when you type specifically, for example, let's delete that and let's do this, then it does suggest, like the obvious things to fill in the method, then you hit tab like in Cursor and it works. But again, compared to Cursor IDE autocomplete, the Cursor one is much better. So yeah, I wouldn't choose VS Code as primary choice, but it is usable. Now with PhpStorm is a bit different story. This is kind of sad because I was a PhpStorm user for many years, 10 years a happy customer, but then they kind of went late to the market with AI things. So if you use PhpStorm as IDE, it has a lot of things here to click, to navigate around, especially since Laravel IDEA plugin became free inside of PhpStorm. So I do like PhpStorm for the fact that I can click pretty much anywhere and it will lead me to the exact method or something related. So a lot of auto clickability. But in terms of autocomplete, for example, it's pretty average. So if I hit enter here, it will take me to the hint of generate the code, and I need to find command \. So this, and then prompt to change the code. So it's not exactly autocomplete, it's more like inline editing. So there's that. And also for AI agent, they released PhpStorm Junie, or it's not PhpStorm, it's JetBrains Junie, which is here. So there's AI chat and there's Junie. It's kind of confusing in a way what is what, but you can type the prompt and ask Junie for something, and the quality is okay but not great. So for example, in this case, I cannot choose the model what is using. I need to go to PhpStorm settings to set that, but I will still demonstrate it to you in action. Remove declare strict types. This is a silly example, but I just see the line from eloquent models in this project. And let's see how Junie does it. Sending LLM request, working. What I do like about Junie, there's a good thing. It's the plan mode by default. It will show the plan, should show the plan. Let me wait for a few seconds. And it's pretty slow actually, in my experience, and people are reporting same thing. So yeah, this is the planning mode. So for now it analyzes the things, and as soon as it's done analyzing, you will see a plan here. There you go. So enumerate, remove, and then you see what's in progress, updating on the task. So editing one file, then editing another file, and it will probably take a few minutes for this relatively simple change. And also personally, I don't like as a video creator that the font is relatively small here, and that's why this is another silly reason why I switched from PhpStorm to Cursor, where I can manipulate the code by just doing the font size, by just doing command plus or command minus. In PhpStorm, I didn't find the setting. Of course, there's font size, but it's like global and it's not that easy. Well, anyway, it's doing the job and it will probably do it successfully. But as I said, it didn't impress me when I tried it for like real tasks. It is slower, it's not exactly clear what model does it use, and also it hallucinates sometimes. So for example, edit pricing table, strict type was removed from model file. Pricing table is not a model file. I asked for eloquent models, but it did it also from pricing table. So anyway, I will stop right now, and this is how you would review the changes later, so you can go file by file. So it is okay, kind of usable, but wouldn't be my first choice. And also the pricing of that JetBrains AI plan is Pro and Ultimate, and Pro is pretty limited actually. From what I've read from people reporting online, everyone goes for Ultimate for any serious usage. And this is, as I understand, on top of PhpStorm as an editor. So you still pay for PhpStorm, and on top you also order AI plan from JetBrains. So from that point of view, if we compare PhpStorm to other AI related or AI first editors, PhpStorm users will stay with PhpStorm if they're happy with the setup, if they have a lot of workflows and tools in PhpStorm for managing bigger projects. This is where PhpStorm shines, with refactoring features, with a lot of tools in the menu here. So if you use those heavily a lot, which means you need IDE and not AI agent, then PhpStorm is fine. But even in PhpStorm, you can also use Claude code inside in the terminal. So probably if I were using PhpStorm, I would not use Juni or PhpStorm or JetBrains AI. I would purchase Claude code subscription and use Claude code inside of PhpStorm. With other editors on the list, I haven't used them much. I've tried Windsurf, it's good enough, similar to VS Code actually. And for those other tools, I'm not qualified enough. I just tried them to basically launch and see if it works. They all do work. They have different kind of value propositions. Some of them work with Open Router, and you could easily use the models like Chinese models like GLM 4.6, which is relatively good, or Qwen Coder. So yeah, if you want to dive deeper into AI, this is the list that you may want to try out on top of the ones that I mentioned in this course. And now let's go to the promised topic of how can we improve the result of AI agents, no matter which agent or IDE you use. Now it's time to talk about how you can improve the results of your prompting the agents. And let's talk about context and guidelines. Those are probably two most important things that you can work on to improve the results. So imagine this prompt, which we had already. So from that, you need to understand how context works. So this becomes the prompt to LLM, whether it's Sonnet or whatever, and from whatever IDE, I will show it on cursor, but the same with Claude Code and Codex and others. So this is the prompt, and in addition to prompt, they have context attached. And in this case, if you attach this file, the content of that file usually becomes the context. And then whatever guidelines you have on top also become the context, and then all of that is sent to the LLM. That's why it is important, so that within that prompt, LLM, the model would know what files to reference, how to generate the code according to your guidelines, your preferences, and of course, in addition to that, it will find additional information with Laravel Boost or searching the docs or something like that. But the more precise information you give in that prompt and in the context, and also let's take a look at guidelines again. We talked about them in the previous lesson about Laravel Boost, or in fact, let's open the cursor guidelines because it has this setting. So if you choose always apply for that MDC file, it will be always applied with all the guidelines. But you can choose to apply manually, and then, for example, you can mention that rules here only for specific prompts where you need that, because guidelines is not necessarily about huge Laravel project rules. It may be guidelines how to work with tests, it may be guidelines specific file how to work with filament, for example, and so on. Because when working with agents, too much context is also a bad thing. One of the typical reasons of so-called hallucinations from models or some guidelines being missed is that there are too many guidelines, too many rules, and then the model doesn't really know or gets lost in which rule to follow precisely. So with Laravel Boost guidelines with a few hundred lines, it's okay-ish. I still personally think it could be shortened somehow or divided into separate files maybe, but from my experience it's okay. Usually Claude and GPT models are okay with following the guidelines. But what I want to emphasize, if you follow the same prompt, for example, you have the prompt, this is the result, you have the code, and if you continue the conversation in the same chat window, like for example now generate second API endpoint or generate something unrelated to this prompt, then the problem is that the result of that prompt becomes the context to the second prompt, which means the second prompt is so-called polluted with the information totally unrelated to that prompt. So that's one thing that is bad. And then another thing, it's about the cost. The cost of any AI request consists of input and output tokens, and you pollute the input tokens, which makes it more expensive to you in the end, more useless, more chance of hallucinations, and perhaps even slower. So whenever you end this topic, this prompt, this subject, always open new chat window in Cursor, or if you work with Claude Code and Codex, there are / commands like clear or new, which basically clears up the context and allows you to start fresh. Keep in mind though that this new chat window or new prompt will not remember anything about the previous prompt, so if they are related prompts, then it may make sense to continue within the same one. It depends on the situation. The final thing with rules, you saw how Laravel Boost generates those rules and guidelines, but you don't necessarily have to agree with them. Quite often I disagree with the way how Boost recommends to do things, because it's always a personal preference, because different teams and different developers prefer different patterns in the projects. Some prefer form request validation, some prefer controller validation, some prefer, for example, action pattern or service pattern, and so on. So in any place of those guidelines, or you can create your own on top, you may override. For example, here avoid DB, prefer model query. I think this is incorrect, because often what I see then is that it's doing model query create like this. So I would probably add here for select operations, or for example model query for select and model create for inserting data, something like this. So basically you can override or change or delete any guidelines by Laravel Boost, or create your own rules. Each IDE has its own different location and rules. So for example, for Cursor, it should be in .cursor rules and then MDC file. There may be multiple files. For Claude Code, it should be file called Claude MD. And for Codex CLI, from what I remember, it's agents.md. It's actually the same text, the same markdown inside. It's just different location of those files that would be taken automatically with the prompt. And then you also have Copilot instructions in this location, and then Juni guidelines MD here. But to recap, what I'm trying to say is that context is probably the most important thing you need to work on. There's even a separate kind of topic or even whole field called context engineering for AI, how to use context more effectively to get better results. So if LLM is hallucinating or producing something not up to your standards, check if it is in your guidelines. Always update your guidelines for the context. If you don't like something in particular, then for the future, tell AI what to do or what not to do, and it's ongoing process of improvement of the context. And the final thing I wanted to show you in this course, so the goal of this course is kind of a recap of current state of the market. What are the main things that you need to know about agentic coding? So the final very important thing is called plan mode. So in this prompt on the right, you saw already there are to-dos here, so 6 to-dos completed. So Cursor generates automatically the to-do list of what it's actually doing, but you can do that before actually prompting and changing the code. At least in Claude Code, it was plan mode for many months now. Cursor introduced it pretty recently, and Codex CLI, I don't think they have that feature yet, or at least I haven't seen that. But basically, if you open the new chat window, for example, in Cursor, here you can choose mode. Agent, which is default, then ask if you just want the answer, like for example, can you check which Laravel version is in your project or something like that. Just a question like ChatGPT, and then there's plan. For example, let's choose plan and let's see that in action. For example, let's prompt that we want another CRUD and let's launch, and in plan mode, it will not actually generate the code. That's the whole point. It will prepare the plan for you. So it will make all the analysis, search the files, and then we'll ask the follow-up questions like this. Few clarifications, and then you answer, for example, question 1a, for example, authorization rules 2, also a, for example, should the API include author statistics? No, b. And then it would prepare the plan for us. And look how the plan looks. So on the left, at least cursor works this way. In Claude Code, I will show you that in a minute. We have the plan. And if you don't like that plan, you may reprompt here to change something. And then if you're ready to actually build, well, you click build, and then it goes out of plan mode into build mode and starts generating the code. So this is a very, very powerful thing for bigger features. Like CRUD, for example. CRUD may be very complex for bigger features, so I do recommend to first consult AI on how it would generate the code and only then allow it to make changes. So that was the demonstration in Cursor where you need to change from agent to plan. In Claude Code, there is a shortcut called Shift-Tab. You need to click it a few times until you land on plan mode here. And here I will give the same prompt. I want to generate CRUD API, and let's see how Claude Code performs the analysis and provides the plan, also asking the follow-up questions. They improved that quite a while recently, so I will help you to generate, and let's wait for like 5 to 10 seconds until it prepares the questions. And there we go. It took not 5 to 10 but 47 seconds. This is how slower Claude Sonnet it is at the moment compared with Composer 1, for example. And here you have questions. So first question, author type, and then you navigate with arrows up and down and choose, for example, that authors are separate from users. Then author fields. In this case, you may have multiple choices, so space here, hit enter, or actually enter is also the choice. Then you hit tab to navigate to the next question, update post, for example, no, keep separate, and then you submit the answers, and then again it would work on the final plan. Again, in this mode, it doesn't generate the code, it generates just the plan, and you will see that in the terminal in I don't know how many seconds. Oh, no, that was quick. So now basically you have specification in a way, but more technical, what it would actually do. So Claude creates the task for itself in a way. And for example, if you don't like something, for example, I don't like the name bio for the field of authors, and then I can choose to proceed with generating the code, or I will choose no, keep planning, and then I will reprompt change bio to description, for example, like this, and then it will change the plan pretty quickly, I think, because it's a small change, and will provide the new plan. Again, yeah, it took like 5 seconds, and then in the new plan, that should be here, description changed from bio, and then when you're happy with that plan, after it may be 10 prompts to change something, again, like conversation with ChatGPT, and then you can choose to auto-accept edits or manually approve each edit, and then Claude Code goes out of planning mode into build mode and start changing the code. So in my experience, plan mode is very, very useful for bigger features. And yeah, this is where I will end this overview course for now. You can ask questions and I may answer them in the comments or shoot follow-up videos or updated course, because I see the questions on Twitter and elsewhere like what tool to use, what workflow to use to get better results with AI. And in my experience, at least for my projects, it's much more simple. So you need to work with context, you need to provide clear prompts, you need to review the code all the time, and you should use plan mode for bigger features. And for Laravel specifically, you should use Laravel Boost. If you work on those specific things, it doesn't matter that much whether you use Cursor, Claude Code, or Codex CLI or others, and which model you use, Claude Sonnet or GPT-5 or others. They are all good enough, and it's all about your workflow, your context and prompting, and improving your own guidelines and prompting and the way you phrase those prompts, so the AI gets better for your specific situations with every prompt. So yeah, what do you think? If you have any questions or maybe disagree with me, we can discuss in the comments below. But for now, that's it for this time, and see you guys in other videos.